Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. Hey, everybody. How are you doing? So I'm gonna contextualize this talk by saying this is a ZK stage, and I'm gonna be talking about ZK. But I think one thing that's really important in a lot of these conversations that's maybe been missing is the contextualization of why we're doing this and why it is that we're working on this, why this matters. So this talk is actually gonna be like 90% focused on the why and the context, and then I'm gonna talk a little bit at the end about what my team and what my project is working on. And my goal here and my kind of rationale is you guys as developers, you guys as supporters and people who are excited about ZK, you can pull up these docs at any time and like look up the stuff I was going to say or I could have said. But the things that you can't go look up on someone's docs is this contextualization that I think is really important. So before we get started, my name is Camila Ramos. I'm the head of developer relations at RISC0, and I'm super, super passionate about kind of the why of why we're here, and that's kind of be the focus today. So we'll start off real quick by capturing kind of what I think the current state of the industry is. So when I did product, I worked at Sony for a bit, and I learned how to do product, which I'm not a product person. I studied computer science. I'm an engineer, so I kind of did that as like a stint of figuring out what I was trying to do back in the day. And I learned this like cool chart that helps you contextualize what it is that you're building. And it's this 4-quadrant thing that has on one end the type of problem and then the number of people impacted by the problem. And in product, where you want to be is you want to solve a big problem for a lot of people because then you have a big market, et cetera. And I think right now in the industry, we're in this quadrant where we're solving a relatively small problem for a relatively small group of people. And I think that's where we end up with like this kind of like meme stuff that the outside world thinks of us. I don't think this, obviously. I think there's a lot of people and projects working on very high impact, high value things, but I think generally this is the state of the industry. And there's some people that get really upset when I say that. And like, I don't know, I feel like I'm in crypto, I get to say it. If you're not in crypto and you said this, I would be mad too. But it's like, it's just the facts. This is the state of the industry. We're solving a relatively small problem for a very small group of people. And where we want to be is in this quadrant. We want to solve a big problem for a lot of people. So how can we do that? Like, what are the steps that we need to do to get there? I think, and this is maybe like a little bit too obvious, but I think this is actually a point that's been missing in a lot of conversations recently is like, we have to go to the places where there are problems, like physically, mentally, ideologically, intellectually, and figure out how we can apply our concepts there. And my kind of thesis is that the best place to do this is by going to places where there's necessity, because I really do believe that necessity breeds innovation. So what do I mean by that? And kind of the things that I want to talk about here are like, what do I mean when I say solve real problems? And kind of what are the missing technical pieces in order to get us there? So I'm going to talk about LATAM and kind of going to make the bull case for why I think developers, investors, and people like us need to be focusing our attention and capital to this region because I think it's ripe for stuff that we're all trying to do. So long story short, if I had to summarize this, all this is saying is like consumers in Latin America are already displaying behaviors that make them and position them in center stage for crypto-based alternatives. So things like mobile-first payments, adoption of neobanks, heavy reliance on cross-border remittance payments, growing political and socioeconomic instability, and social pressures. So the thing that I think is actually most interesting about these stats is the adoption of neobank and non-bank stuff. So when we say neobank and non-bank, we're talking things like PayPal and the likes that are not like banks per se, but they offer financial services. So nearly half of the population remains unbanked in Latin America, and a large, vast majority of people in Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, and other countries that just weren't listed in this report stated regular usage of online payments through neo and non-bank applications like PayPal, Mercado Pago, and other ones. And I put this chart here because I think it really visualizes like how great the usage is, and it's really overwhelming. The other thing that I think is really interesting and like a really ripe opportunity for crypto are remittance payments. So remittance payments are like the cross-border payments of you sending money back home or you sending money to family members in other countries. So according to a report by the World Bank in 2021, remittance flows to Latin America and the Caribbean reached $131 billion in 2021. And according to that same report, remittances in 2021 represent almost 25% of the GDP in both Honduras and El Salvador and 14.8% of Guatemala. So it's like a quarter of the entire country's GDP is just from remittance payments. And the systems that exist now are not great. You're paying high fees, there's low operational speed, and it's kind of the de facto mode, and it's the only option people have. And what's really interesting is that when you look at P2P traffic on crypto platforms, you'll see that Latin America is actually really, really high up. Maybe the colors aren't as clear back there, so I'll tell you. Latin America is the one, oh, I have a pointer, I think. Okay, Latin America is this blue one that's like up here, this one. So when you think about countries and regions that are transacting in crypto, at least for me, when I first kind of embarked on this journey of researching stuff in Latin America and trying to make this case, I definitely did not expect for Latin America to be in the top percentage of peer-to-peer transactions. And what that tells me is that, and what we're going to talk about in the next slides, is like there's something going on in this region that is pushing these transactions into happening. Because later on you'll see, and in these reports you'll see, these are not the regions that are using DeFi and kind of like the like crypto-native applications that are out there. This one is really interesting. So like the key got cut off, but blue represents men, and this light green represents women. And if you look at Latin American countries like Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, women, and there's like categorized into developing and developed. Women in developing countries are actually transacting and holding crypto at a similar or higher rate than men in developed countries. I have a whole thesis on this and about like machismo and like Latin culture and how it like opens up the way for women to transact in a way that's within the social norms, but that's allowing them to kind of like experience financial freedom in a different way, but we just don't have time for that. My other point is that in these regions, there's a lot of inflation and destabilization of the local currency. So the key is kind of small, but like in these first few countries, inflation is at the 200% mark, and then the bottom ones is like 75% and close to 75%. And like these people, their local currency is getting devalued more and more every day. Argentina is going through a crisis. There's a black market for US dollars. Like literally, it's illegal to have US dollars, first of all. So there's a black market to have US dollars because it's the only way for them to store value and like hold it together from getting completely plummeted by the market. The next thing that I want to really focus on is like my thesis on what happens when you solve hyperlocal problems and the kind of growth that can come from that. And these are some examples that I'm going to give. So Mercado Libre and Mercado Pago. Mercado Libre is like the Latin version of something like eBay or Amazon. It's kind of like a mix because it's anyone can go on there and sell things, anything, services, cars, like a table, art, anything you want. It started in Colombia a decade ago, and it started as a marketplace for locally made goods, and they created their own payment system called Mercado Pago to handle the finance part of it. And when this started, literally Mercado Pago was made for this platform just to handle payments on it. And since then, it's grown so much that now it's a whole neobank that offers like a bunch of financial services. And what they did was really interesting because they just focused on solving one really small problem, which is like how do we manage the transactions and the money part, the payments part of this online like good system that we're selling. And what they saw was that people were overwhelmingly using the system. They were really happy with the system. And then Mercado Pago saw that opportunity, they smelled the blood, and they went on to capture the entire market, and now they're one of the most widely used financial products in Latin America. Another one is PixPay. That's spelled wrong. It should be an X. I thought I updated that. But PixPay is Brazil's dominant digital payments app. Brazil's another country that's like super center stage for crypto. They're one of the countries in Latin America that transacts at the highest rate and that participates the most in crypto stuff. So it has over 60 million users, and in monthly transactions, it's equivalent to over, like more than $1 billion. $1 million. I knew that was 6.8 billion reales. That's their local currency, but like that's a shit ton of money of monthly transactions every month. And again, this started as like a super hyper local thing. It's still hyper local. It's only available in Brazil, and it's the dominant payments digital app at this point. The other thing I want to talk about now, kind of moving on to the ZK part and like the part that you guys are probably most interested in, the things that I think are kind of missing in order to get us to this point are things around UX and cost per transaction. So when you're dealing with a population that has a lot of price sensitivity, you're thinking about a population whose average monthly income is like $500 a month. So when we're talking about transaction fees, it has to be in the fractions of a cent in order for it to make sense for a population like this. And there's been a lot of progress made in just the last like 3 months on this. Like Optimism's Bedrock upgrade, I just was reading today that they were able to lower transaction fees to like less than 10 cents for sending Ether and like less than that for a swap. And if you look at, I think L2Beat today, a lot of the L2s are actually like their prices are going lower. And even for the ZK stuff, when they first came out, it has this like inverse relationship where a lot of people have to use it in order for the price to go low because it's shared amongst many proofs. So right now it's in kind of a weird place because it's not having a ton of usage yet, but in the future it's going to get to a place where these transaction fees are in a place where you can realistically use them in a region with this level of price sensitivity. The other thing that I've seen people, like a discourse that I've seen often, is people kind of maybe not understanding what we say when we're like, oh, transaction fees have to be a fraction of a penny, and people are like, oh, but like $3 isn't that bad, or like whatever the current like price is, like it's not that bad. And for us, it's really not that bad. I think like everyone here, we can easily spend $3, $4, $7, $12, like $14 on a transaction. But when you contextualize it by like the local market, so for example, I live in Colombia now. I'm from Colombia, and a lunch every day, like the kind of classic lunch, is like $5. And that's like me like going kind of like a step beyond the regular like lunch you can eat every day. So people who are eating lunch for like $3, $4 are not about to spend $3, $4 on a transaction when you think about the number of times that you transact on a daily basis and the level of opportunity there is for transaction in these regions. Okay, and the other part that's missing is like a level of increased security, because again, when you're dealing with the super price sensitive population, it's not acceptable to just be like, oh, there was like a hack, or there was like, some like security vulnerability and we lost your money. For people like this, it's like completely unfathomable and unfathomable and like life ruining to lose $20. Like maybe that's a little bit dramatic, but when you're talking about a population who's literally living with $500 a month, and that's average, there's people above and below that, obviously, we can't really make the convincing argument that this is a better, more robust system until we figure these things out. And that's why I'm interested in ZK, and that's why I'm kind of working in this space. And I think there's a lot of cool teams that are doing interesting things. Specifically, I think Succinct Labs. So for the ZK kind of super people that are interested in here, if you haven't checked out Succinct Labs, you should definitely check it out. They're doing ZK proven consensus, and they're building this thing called telepathy. And it's a really, really interesting interoperability protocol that I think is maybe not like super widely talked about yet. Axiom is doing really cool stuff, RISC0 is doing really cool stuff, and the ZK EVM projects are all doing really cool stuff. And then the thing that I think is also missing is new and improved recovery flows. And I think a lot of teams are working on that. There's been like a lot of conversations about account abstraction, and I think we're moving in the right direction for something like this. So now I'm going to talk very briefly about RISC0. That's the project that I work on, and for those who don't know, they're building a ZK VM. It's built, it exists. And the thing that's most interesting is their product Bonsai. So Bonsai is the end game for them is like a decentralized proving service where anybody on any chain, any application can request and post proofs. And what I mean by that is like you can be on, let's say, Ethereum layer 1 or Optimism, wherever you want to be. And you want to move computation off chain because it's too expensive or whatever the case, you can write your application, you can write a regular smart contract in Solidity, then you can have a separate contract or a separate program in Rust, and in theory, any language that can target RISC-V, do some computation, and then get a proof that that computation was done correctly, and have that proof on chain, and have that proof verified on chain. And I think the thing that's really cool here is that, like, just in general, the ability to move computation off chain, but also to prove provenance and to have like the security properties and the privacy properties are the pieces that I think are really going to make something like what I just described real. And the thing that's really cool about RISC0 is that you can leverage existing ecosystems into your dev workflow. So instead of having to learn a new DSL and like having to kind of bootstrap a new ecosystem from the beginning as far as tooling and libraries, et cetera, you can leverage existing workflows like Cargo and Crates when you're talking about the Rust ecosystem, which has a very mature and robust ecosystem, and that really opens the doors for just like a healthy developer ecosystem without having to like bootstrap it over many years. Before this, I worked at Fuel, and Fuel, we were building a roll-up on Ethereum that was not EVM, and one of the most like impressive but yet difficult things about that project was that they had to bootstrap an entirely new ecosystem with a new language, with new tooling, with new SDKs. And it really just is an uphill battle for developers to convince them, one, that they should learn all these new things, and then two, wait for a level of maturity to be able to say you have the things that you actually need in your day-to-day and your developer workflows. I wrote more about kind of this thesis in this blog post called The Dead End of Eurocentric Crypto. If anyone wants to check it out more, that QR code should take you to Mirror, but if you can't find it for some reason, you should just be able to Google The Dead End of Eurocentric Crypto. And there I kind of give more stats and talk more about this specific thesis. And if anyone here is like super interested, lives in Latin America, is working on any project that could kind of work toward this, I would love to connect after. And yeah, thank you so much. We have about 3 minutes left for questions.
Thanks, Camila. Any questions? Anyone?
Yeah, thank you, Camila, for the talk. So you mentioned about diversity in the blockchain ecosystem and how we can help including other regions. And one of the questions that I have, for example, is how easy or like, for example, if I was a company that is trying to look for engineers coming from South America, where should I look? Like, what are the resources or the places that I have to go in order to kind of include developers from those regions?
Yeah, I think unfortunately there isn't like a central place where I could be like, go to this and you'll access everyone. So it's kind of like on a case by case basis. But and this is gonna sound so corny, but it's the truth. Like Twitter is the best place if you want to find developers to work on your thing. If you want to find developers to use your thing, I think most cities that are crypto hubs like Medellin, like Buenos Aires, like Mexico City, they have some sort of like government or like local government thing. Like Medellin has this thing called Ruta N, and it's a whole like government-backed program to get more software developers jobs and to connect them to the wider ecosystem. So something like that might be a really good thing. And if you specifically want to chat, I can like connect you to some people if that's something that you would like.
That's very good. Anyone else with any questions?
Hi, thanks for the talk. How do you think about the problem for people in LATAM to move money on-chain and move money off-chain? That seems to be always like the point where it just breaks.
Falls apart, yeah. So I moved to Colombia to do this type of research actually, because I think, so I wrote the post that I posted up there in October of last year, right before DEF CON, I published it. And the #1 piece of feedback that I got was like, you're pointing out a problem, and that's really easy to do, but like, what about the solution? And like that really hit me, and I was like, you're right, like I'm gonna go try to figure it out. And that is like the biggest blocker, I think, is like having on and off ramps. But what I do think is that there are more friendly regulatory vibes in Latin America than there are, at least in the States. I know Europe is also trying to, at least the UK is like trying to be more friendly. So although it's not very robust yet, I do think that there is a much better chance of robust regulation and regulatory stuff that opens the door for this type of stuff. So there are on and off ramps, like as of, I think they just, like literally just a couple months ago, you can't use Binance anymore. But up until then, you could use Binance and kind of that was the go-to. But there's a lot of teams that are building very local solutions to allow people to on-ramp their Colombian pesos, like not US dollars, but their local currency and like move it. To answer your question, I think it is the #1 blocker. And I don't think, like at least me, I have an answer for like how you solve that. I think the answer is like, more of us have to do DevRel in like politics. Like, so you have to go back to your country, call your senators or like whatever the equivalent is, go speak in front of your Congress, and like it's the only way it's gonna happen. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do in Colombia, is like bring my expertise and my skills as someone who's Colombian and be like, this is what we should do. It's the only way to make regulatory changes happen. Sorry, it's not a good answer.
There is something that recently happened in El Salvador also. I think in Latin America, the legislations and all is quite getting open and friendlier to crypto and blockchain space.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, I think in general the vibe is a lot more friendly, and I think El Salvador, I think it was El Salvador that's trying to propose like a central bank digital currency thing.
I think that is what made news in the last weeks, that it is the first country in the world to do that.
Yeah.
And they accept Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies as legal tender.
As legal tender, yeah, exactly.
Okay. Any other questions around Latin America or Europe or the world in general or blockchain?
Okay, not the world in general. I don't have the answers. Okay.
Questions can still come, no? Okay.
Okay.
If not, thank you, Camila.
Cool, thanks everyone.
Pleasure hearing you.